Welcome to the episode of Jay Leno's Garage. This is what we call our Assess and Caress, where we pick three cars and try to figure out which one has increased in value the most over the last 5 years. All the vehicles are brought to us from the Audrain Museum in Newport, Rhode Island, and brought to us by Reliable Carriers, Inc. With us today, Donnell Osborne, the man they call the Prima Donald. Why? You'll find out in just a moment. He is an appraiser extraordinaire, and he will tell us what he thinks these are worth. And of course, I will give you the actual value. All right, what do we have today, Donald?
Today we have three cars which show the theme, look rich for cheap.
Look rich for cheap, okay.
We've got a 1939 Rolls-Royce Wraith, a 1983 Rolls-Royce Corniche Convertible.
That looks expensive.
And a 2006 Bentley Continental Flying Spur.
All right, where do you want to start?
Let's start right where we are, here in the center with this 1939 Rolls-Royce Wraith.
This looks like what people think a Rolls-Royce is supposed to look like. You know, modern Rolls-Royces, well, I always tell the story, I was told a bunch of times. A friend of mine came by here with a 59 single headlight Rolls-Royce, the classic
Silver Cloud.
Yeah. Okay. He paid $15,000 for it. It didn't run right. We tuned it around, got it tuned up. Let's go around the block. Okay, driving around. Now, normally when I drive around here in McLarens and Duesenberg, people wave. I pull up to a light and I look over, the guy gives me the finger. I go, what's that for? He goes, yeah, you Rolls Royce. You know, you look like you're collecting the rent. That's what it was. And this looks like that. It looks like Grey Poupon mustard and all
the car of Mr. Monopoly.
Yeah, exactly. Mr. Monopoly, exactly. Or Mr. Osborne. There you go, right there.
Well, you know, you're not far off here. I love Rolls Royces like this. And the Wraith was a very interesting car because it was an example of what Rolls-Royce did in the 1930s, as many other manufacturers did, to make sure that they had a lower-priced alternative. They sort of went down and up at the same time. This was offered at the same time as the Rolls-Royce Phantom III, the first V12 Rolls-Royce, and which was aimed at a very, very high mark. It came out in 1936. This came out in 1938 and was obviously only produced for 2 years, 38 and 39, because the war intervened.
Right.
But quite interestingly, they sold far more Phantom IIIs than they did Wraiths.
Right.
They sold about 500 of these cars before the war, and about 700 and some odd Phantom IIIs in the same time. Now, what's interesting too about this is that this is the successor to another, I think, very overlooked and misunderstood Rolls-Royce, the 2025. Which is the junior version of the car that was offered alongside the Phantom II, the Phantom I.
Like a doctor's coupe, those would be a
exactly.
2025.
And the 2025 was offered in all sorts of body styles. You could get big limousines like this, you get little coupes, some really interesting and attractive roadsters. And they had the reputation for a long time of being very sort of slow and uninteresting.
Well earned.
But, you know, how fast do you need to go in your Rolls Royce?
Well, I think you want to be able to go fast enough to pull away from the hoi polloi. You know, that's the most misunderstood word. You know, the hoi polloi. No, it doesn't mean rich people. It means ordinary people. Thank you.
Exactly.
People think, oh, Mr. Hoi polloi. Yes, I'm an ordinary person. Thank you very much. Anyway, okay.
Reclaiming the language.
Well, I knew that was a problem with it. I mean, if there's a lesser car next to you, you want to be able to just pull away. And you couldn't in that. It was different between a Model T and a Model A. I think that would be a good analogy.
Yeah,
because Model T reliable, runs fine, 40 miles an hour, the end of the world. You know, you want to be able to go a little bit faster.
Well, the 2025, as opposed to the Phantoms, were also for people who were more self-effacing. So they probably didn't want to pull away from the traffic as much as someone in a Phantom, who is actually going to collect the rent, would. But getting back to the Wraith is a very interesting car because it was, of course, like all Rolls-Royces of the time, all coach-built. This is a Park Ward limousine with a divider window. So it was definitely not an owner-driver car. It was a car meant to be used by a chauffeur and taking the owners around. And because of the presence that this car has, it's not surprising this particular example, which was actually donated to the Audrain Museum by a very, very loyal and dedicated member of the museum, was actually a TV star. This is the hero car in the AMC series Nosferatu. But nonetheless, to your point, when you see a car like this, you think, this is a Rolls-Royce, regardless of the fact that it is the junior Rolls-Royce.
Right.
That doesn't matter to people who don't know.
But ultimately, I think it hurts the brand. You know, Packard did that. Packard was the top-of-the-line American car, and then they came out with the six-cylinder smaller model, and people bought them because, hey, you know, Bob's got a Packard. Wow. But then the reputation just went down because, oh, they're not what they used to be. The other thing interesting is that Miss Thornton here is kneeling.
Yes.
Now, there's all sorts of rumors as to why that is. Now, the one I heard, and this might be one of those tales, is the fact that in the Mideast, they didn't want a woman standing up proud in the car, so they had her kneeling. The cars that went to the Middle East had this. I don't know. Is there any truth to that, do you think?
Not that I know of. I think it was simply a matter of owner's choice.
Yeah.
Because this car was delivered new to the UK
Right.
and then came to the US after the war. The other thing about this car is, as you pointed out, Packard, like most manufacturers, also offered a less expensive model.
Right.
And it sold well and kept them in business. It's interesting to note that the Rolls-Royce really didn't penetrate that lower priced market. And after the war, when they came back with the Silver Wraith,
Right.
it was actually positioned on top of the Silver Dawn, which was the first factory-bodied Rolls-Royce.
Well, as American manufacturers learned, it costs just as much to manufacture a cheap car as it does an expensive car. So you're not really saving anything. You know, you might get more volume out there, but your profit is not as good. You know, there are a few, as a donated car, you have a few things loose and rattly. It needs a lot of work. And this is, like you say, a labor of love. This is something a guy might buy after the kids have graduated college and go in the garage and you got a retirement project to drive you to your grave eventually, you know. and that's what's fun about them, yeah.
And it's also a great way, one of the things that is surprising to a lot of people who don't know, the Rolls-Royce Owners Club is a very, very active group, a very welcoming people. So this is a great way to get into club membership and
Right.
to do tours, etc. It's a terrific car to drive, although you wouldn't think about that looking at it. I drove this car recently for a video on the Audrain Museum Network, and it's really amazingly pleasant to drive, especially for a chauffeur-driven car. It's got lots of room. It's fairly sophisticated in terms of its mechanicals for a pre-war English car. It's got mechanically servo-assisted hydraulic brakes and central lubrication and all
Right.
those things that, you know, you think is quite amazing.
Plus the other fun thing, you know, England being a nation of scribes, you know, they just write everything down. All this wood, if you call Rolls-Royce and you say, I have car number so-and-so, they have on their file, allegedly, but I think there's some truth to it, they have a replacement piece for for exactly the wood. It's all, you know, that's what I love about England. You know, a friend of mine worked on the movie Mutiny on the Bounty. And they wanted to be accurate to a fault. So they found the actual tailor shop where Captain Bligh had his uniform made. And they went in and said, we're doing a movie. You go, like, oh, hang on, comes out with a book. Boom, opens it, Bligh, here it is. Yeah, Bligh right there. He had this, and I believe he had a pickle and onion sandwich later. You know, they had everything. They had his size, the material, everything. And for the movie, they made the exact same suit. I mean, that's what's great about it. So if you enjoy all the minutia of owning a classic car, that's the great thing about Rolls-Royce. Everything is available, every little bit of detail. You know, when I bought that Spectre, I got a book signed by all the employees, and there's not that many of them. There's not that many. It's a small, dedicated family, and it's just kind of fun.
I had a great pleasure and honor to tour the Rolls-Royce factory a couple of years ago, and my favorite place in the factory was the veneer humidor room.
Oh, right.
Absolutely amazing. You walk in there, and just the smells and the sheer variety of the woods that they have is astonishing.
Did you ever go to Crewe?
No, I never made it.
See, I went to Crewe in the early '80s when I worked for Rolls-Royce. Actually, no, I guess the '70s. And I've told the story a million times, but you walk in and they go, "There's where the bomb came through," and you know, in '42, whatever it was, and they show you, and they got the tarp over there. But I went into the upholstery shop. There's tea kettle whistling. Hello, dearie. Oh, you've got a Rolls Royce, have you? Well, no, something that you're just this lady sewing hand. Hilarious.
Yeah, the workforce right now is a lot younger than it used to be.
Right.
And it's
Well, let's open up. Let's see this.
You want to see
engine.
this wonderful engine?
You know,
You want to open on your side or my side? I think it's more interesting on your side than mine.
Okay, let's hope. Let's see what we got here. And this is what, an F head?
It's an F head.
Yeah.
And I think it puts out somewhere around 120 horsepower. Of course, in these days, Rolls-Royce never released horsepower figures.
Right.
But, you know, sort of adequate to move a 2-ton vehicle at a decent speed.
And basically the same engine that goes back to the original Ghost, pretty much, isn't it?
Yes, this is based on, obviously, it's a 2025 engine, which is a development of the Ghost engine.
But as you can see, this one obviously is not restored, but when you get these restored, they're beautiful to look at, lovely, you know, polished materials and copper and brass, and really interesting. Really
Well, we should, again, just take a moment to talk again about this car's entertainment history, because in the series Nosferatu, it was treated like a film car. I mean, and you're very familiar with what happens to film cars.
Oh, yeah.
So during the course of the series, the car was burned twice, and I think driven off a cliff or something like that. I mean, not actually, but virtually. So it's led a rough life, and I think that it's very happy to be in genteel retirement with the Audrain and running again as a driving car in the road.
There's a reason you never let your car go to film, unless it's for that purpose. A friend of mine had a Citroen SM that a director wanted and said, any damage you do, we will pay for it. And they got a legal document that felt anything, the slightest scratch, he was covered. They got the car, the director took a Sawzall, cut into the dash to get, and then
a camera
a
place.
big camera in there. And when he got the car back, the guy goes, no, we'll pay for it no matter what it is. They go, well, you can't fix this. I mean, he got a lot of money, but the car was essentially total. Yeah. But and the director, he just thought, well, whatever it is, you know, they're artists, they're not car people. So the idea, we just fix it. No,
exactly. Well, let's take another look at a Hollywood icon of a totally different type, the Rolls Corniche Convertible.
All right.
So here we have this 1983 Rolls-Royce Corniche Convertible. These are cars that are very familiar to us both, especially you, as this is one of the cars that Rolls-Royce was selling when you worked for Rolls-Royce. I mean, this is, I guess, a newer model. You worked for Rolls-Royce in the 80s.
Well, this is the 80s.
Correct.
I was done by 72. So, no, I worked there while I was in college. And, you know, this is a classic example of the first is the best. You know, like the first generation Mustang, to me, the purest, the cleanest. They added a lot of Jim Crackery stuff to it. They got a lot, like with this one, when you saw the 69 or the 70 Corniche, either convertible or coupe, very clean line. This has the big, you know, government bumpers on it. Has a bit of chrome that you didn't really have on the original. It just seems tarted up to me. I love the early cars, the purity, the thin steering wheel, the V8 engine. They were lighter. And something that always annoyed me about Rolls-Royce, that's why they've truly become a modern company now, is this. You're making a convertible. Make the top go into the trunk, whatever you want to call it. I mean, you got to put this down. You got to snap this on by hand.
That's all about having budget for development. This is a car that was designed in the late 1950s, early 1960s.
Right.
So they certainly did not have the money, as would be proven in the years to come after this car was built, to really do that kind of material improvements. And also one of the things which is very interesting, and I think that especially in black, this car shows off very, very well those updates, like the 5 mile per hour bumpers, where if you see them in sort of a beige color where they're body colored, it really sort of screams 1980s, sort of Miami Vice kind of, you know, color coordinated everything.
But these are a classic example of workmanship over engineering. The great thing about I've told this story too about, I have the Bentley, which is really just the different hood on version of the Rolls-Royce, the Turbo R. And when the seat broke, they want a lot of money to fix it. So we took it apart ourselves. It was the wiring loom, it was so beautifully put together under there. I didn't have to pry, I didn't strip screws trying to get them out. Everything, you know, a lot of times you get Italian cars, you take a door panel off, it's like Attack of the Spaghetti, you know? Whereas this thing, the seat, everything was nicely laid out. You know, there was like a cadmium screw with a washer, a lock washer, you just turn. It was such a pleasure to work on. And that's what's great about these. They're beautifully put together and beautifully made. For the early part, until they got bought by BMW in early 2000 or so, they just didn't have the development time, like you say.
Correct. And one of the things, obviously, the theme of these three cars is look rich for cheap.
Right.
You mentioned something that is very, very important. Although the purchase price may be low, the maintenance price is not. These are very expensive cars when new, and they were built to a very high standard. and they are very detailed. So maintenance is key. As we mentioned on the Rolls-Royce Wraith, you buy them and maintain them and restore them for love, not as a project of investment. But they do deliver, again, a level of driving that is unimaginable in a
that's
comparably
true.
priced modern car.
This is either an example of how old I am, or just how much prices have changed. When I worked for Rolls-Royce, the most expensive car was the Corniche. It was $29,900. They didn't want to hit that $30,000. But that's the top of the line Rolls-Royce was $30,000.
And that was in what year?
That was 70, 69, 70.
Exactly, but that was, my mother bought her first car in 1968, a VW Beetle with automatic stick shift, and that cost $1,495.
I know, $1,400.
$1,495,
right,
exactly.
Yeah. So
my father's famous Stylage Pontiac Catalina in 1967 was a $3,500 car.
I know.
So $30,000.
to me, the best thing you can do to a Rolls is put it back to stock. Like someone has put this sort of Grant steering wheel, I don't know, phony.
It's a Nardi-esque.
Yeah, it just, you know, the whole thing about being a Rolls-Royce is keeping it a Rolls-Royce. And I see them with, 24-inch wheels and big dubs and all kinds of stuff on them. I go, what are you doing? You're missing the whole point of the automobile.
Well, I wouldn't put the Nardi-esque wood-rimmed wheel in the same category as putting 22s on it. But I think the idea here was that a former owner thought, well, this is a sporty Rolls-Royce, so I think I'll have a sporty steering wheel in it. There is that wonderful story that you've told about the ad for Rolls-Royce for Corniche, where the fellow is out driving with a woman, he's stopped for speeding.
Right, well, the man is standing like this, and the woman's in the car going, and the cop is lecturing him. And he's a rather patrician-looking fellow. He's got the, the sort of little sailor suit that guys used to wear, and the cop is like this, and he's, and the wife is, the woman is, no one talks to my husband like that, I mean, it was such a Rolls-Royce ad, but it was great. It was great.
Well, you get crazy when you put the top down in a Rolls-Royce.
Well, that's what it is.
And it's also wonderful. You mentioned the early Mulliner Park Ward drop head and coupes. And of course, one of my favorite things is the original Thomas Crown affair with Faye Dunaway and Steve McQueen. The car that Steve McQueen drives most in that movie, people think about the Dune buggy and they think about the Ferrari 275 GTB. He drives a Mulliner Park Ward two-door saloon, and that car just, the impression it made on me then still lasts to this day.
It's just a classic, clean design. Like, no, this just has a bit too much flash. The wheels are chrome, please, It's just a little too much, Whereas that one, it makes its own sort of quiet statement. Yeah. Let's open the hood. When you look under the hood of a Rolls-Royce or the equivalent Bentley of the period, you feel like you're in the engine room of a great steamship. Everything seems massive and overbuilt, these giant shock towers here. Although this looks overly complicated because it has emissions equipment and everything.
Exactly.
When you saw it when it came out in the 70s with the V8, it just looked like a steamship, You had a big thing, it said oil, and big, everything, there's no plastic covers.
Everything is beautifully labeled and etched, hydraulic system.
Right.
You've got the warnings about the mineral oil in it in 5 different languages. It's like, this is a car which obviously is an international car.
And of course you have Frigidaire, GM air conditioning, and a GM transmission, which I'm sure they modified for their own use.
Exactly, of course. They modified it to the Rolls-Royce standards. And one of the things which I also love, the fact that this is a 1980s car, and there's no hood prop, there's no hydraulic struts. Massive springs hold it up.
Those look like garage door springs, don't they? When you go,
It's absolutely amazing. Well, now let's take a look at a different piece of technological achievement. Let's take a look at the 2006 Bentley Continental Flying Spur. Now, you mentioned before in our conversation about what Rolls-Royce could not do in terms of development before they were bought by BMW. And of course, the great split of the Rolls-Royce group between VW and the Volkswagen group. It's quite famous and quite interesting at the time. And of course, this is the first Bentley that was created new under Volkswagen Group ownership.
Well, to me, I think this is an important car because this is the reason a lot of car companies, when they came out with a upscale brand did not keep their original name. By that I mean Nissan had Infiniti, that was their top of the line. Toyota had Lexus. Honda had Acura, especially in the United States, although in Europe it's still Honda. It's why I always like Ford. When the Ford GT came out, they said, no one's buy a $100,000 Ford. And Ford's attitude was, if it's a good enough car, they will. And they did. And now they're selling Ford GTs for $1 million with the name Ford right on it. When this engine was developed, Ferdinand Piëch, I think the most brilliant engineer since his grandfather, Ferdinand Porsche, developed the W12, but he developed for the Volkswagen Phaeton. And it had Volkswagen emblems all over it. And in Europe, that wasn't a problem. But in America, Volkswagen, isn't that the...
well, it was a bit of a problem in Europe as well for them.
Yeah.
But yes, it's one of those things that also... The Volkswagen Group, I have to say, in my opinion, is probably one of the best brand stewards of any conglomerate that has ever existed. They have managed to maintain the identities of an incredible variety of brands. Skoda and VW and Seat and Bugatti and Audi and Volkswagen. And Lamborghini. I mean, it's absolutely amazing. And Bentley, of course. And one of the things that the Bentley folks were at great pains to distance themselves with the Continental GT and the Flying Spur from the Phaeton. They said, yes, well, there are certain similarities in the engine. We, of course, tweak things to make it Bentley appropriate. One of the most interesting things about the difference between the Bentley W12 in this car and that in the Phaeton is the fact that the German manufacturers were all held to a gentleman's and governmental agreement that the cars would not go faster than 155 miles per hour. Ha-ha! Bentleys were built in the UK. This car would go nearly 200 miles per hour.
Right.
So they got to prove the capabilities of the engine and the chassis in a way that they couldn't with the German branded cars.
And this really looks almost exactly like the VW Phaeton, pretty much. A little bit bigger.
It does. Well, from the A-pillar forward, it's identical to the Continental GT.
Right.
And the Continental GT was actually based on a Rolls-Royce concept car before the Rolls-Royce split. That they were going to do a sort of a more sporty Bentley. As you well know, you have a...
I have a Turbo R.
A Turbo R. I mean, they were making the effort to differentiate the Bentley brand in a way that went back to its sporting heritage. And the Continental GT, I think, was a brilliant move on the part of the Volkswagen Group because it not only re-established Bentley as a performance car, but also was a car that felt completely different in character than a Rolls-Royce.
Right.
And they thought, well, let's do this sedan so that we can, again, prove that we can do a high-performance luxury sedan. This is also right directly in my wheelhouse. I mean, I love cars like this from the first time I was a kid and fell in love with the first Maserati Quattroporte in 1963.
I like those too, yeah.
The idea that you could put 4 people in a car, their luggage, and go 120 miles per hour effortlessly is, I think, absolutely amazing and brilliant, and to me the entire point of this kind of car. And it's also probably, well, I won't say the absolute quintessence, but very close to the entire idea of looking rich for cheap.
Right.
Because these cars were extremely expensive when they knew, over $200,000.
Right.
And the depreciation, quite frankly, is massive.
Well, I think depreciation is massive because they built so many of them. You know, this car was actually a brilliant car because when it came out, the equivalent Ferrari or Rolls-Royce was $100,000 to $200,000 more. And you looked at the interior and, oh, is that a Breitling clock in there? Not really, it just says Breitling, but people think it's a Breitling clock. I guess they license it. They did all those kinds, the same sort of leather as Rolls-Royce. Well, this looks like Connolly leather. Well, it's Connolly with a K. You know, there's always, but there's always something. So when you looked at it, it was a tremendous value because you had a 200-mile-an-hour car with a 12-cylinder engine. I mean, it was really just the greatest deal. And so many people leased them, and every guy on Wall Street bought one. And then when they all kind of came back in and the leases ran out, then they got pretty cheap. You can get one for probably a third of what they cost new with low mileage.
And they are mechanically complex cars.
Here's how complex. Engine out for spark plug change.
Let's take a look at the engine.
Yeah. Now, the car can go 100,000 miles on those spark plugs, but when it's time to change them, engine out.
Now, this is also something which is a slight disappointment to me. This is the beginning of the time when everyone was covering their engines.
Right, right.
Although we do have the wonderful casting on top, we do have a bit of the plastic there. So
Right.
it gives sort of a nod to intake. But, you know, again, it's a remarkable power plant and amazingly compact.
It is amazing compact, and you still have metal here. You know, it's not a plastic cap or any of that. This is all, I guess, aluminum, isn't it? Yeah. Yeah, but yeah, you really can't see anything.
Right.
You can't see the W or even the 12. You know.
But it is one of those things that delivers the performance in a way that is so true to the brand. There is a connection emotionally between a car like this and the great Bentleys of the 1930s.
And the great thing about German engineering is just this hood. Now, if this was an American car, the hood would come to here. So when you're working on it, this goes straight up, and I think you can click it over and get it straight up, so you can actually get in here and service it. It's like Porsches when you take even the mid-engine
The Cayman.
The Cayman rather. You can get it looks like you can't get the alternator out. Yes, you can. It all comes apart very easily.
Well, that's one of the things that I think that, and I could be wrong, and I'm sure that somebody will post that I am, but I think that the Boxster was the first car that actually had no access to the engine except from below.
Right, right.
And it was one of the great disappointments to me. And today in the modern 911, it's like, wow, it's an amazing performance car. Let's open up that deck lid and we see two fans.
Right, right. Yeah, that's it.
The car is fan powered.
Right, right. Yeah.
So I'm glad that manufacturers at least now are getting back to displaying the engines again.
Right,
you know,
right.
Letting us know that these are mechanical objects. This is an extraordinary vehicle, and
yeah. Well, let's make our decision.
okay, so let's review what we have here today in Look Rich for Cheap.
All right.
We've got a 1939 Rolls-Royce Wraith, a 1983 Rolls-Royce Corniche Convertible, and a 2006 Bentley Continental Flying Spur. Which is your guess, and it is a guess, which has gained the most value in the last 5 years?
Well, you have to take condition of the car. If this thing was a beautiful Rolls-Royce 100-point Pebble Beach restoration, obviously it would be worth 3 times what it is now. So let's start with the most expensive. I think probably the Corniche. You know, Rolls-Royce has sort of come back with a vengeance. They're extremely successful now. They was always successful, but now they've reached a level that was unheard of at any other point in history. People see it not as an older lady been dolled up to look younger, you know what I mean? So I would say this one, being a convertible, to drive a Rolls-Royce Corniche Convertible just looks like you're a gazillionaire. Probably number 2 would be the Bentley, because there's just so many of them and they're pretty cheap. Well, it's tough because this needs so much work. This is probably a $40,000 car, $35,000. All right, let's go number 1, Corniche, number 2, Bentley, number 3, this. But these two could switch at any time, I think, because you can get those for almost nothing.
Okay, so in our Look Rich for Cheap sweepstakes,
I rest my case.
we have our 1939 Wraith.
Right.
And regardless of condition, just in general, a car that either needs a restoration or a car that is a running, driving, presentable car. 5 years ago, it might have been about $19,000, and today it'd be about $22,000.
Okay.
So there's been some appreciation. People, again, are looking for interesting motoring experiences.
Right.
The Bentley Continental, 5 years ago, a car like this, which has very low mileage, it's got 20,000 miles.
Oh, see, I
from
didn't
new.
know that. Okay.
A car like this probably could have been brought for about $37,000. Today, it is still a depreciating car, so it's about $35,000
So
today.
it's gone down.
The Rolls-Royce Corniche, 5 years ago, would have been about a $50,000 car, and today is a $70,000 car.
Right.
So, you are correct. It
All
is the
three.
Corniche. Well, you said it could switch.
Yeah,
so
it could
you
switch.
hedged
Okay.
your bets.
Okay. Well, that's the big one, in fact. It's a convertible. It's a Rolls-Royce. That beats everything right there. And then just to drive around and be seen in that, you know.
And when you think about the price of new cars today,
Right.
and even collector cars today,
Right.
all 3 of these cars offer outstanding value as collector cars. Extraordinary performance, great build quality in the Bentley Continental, wonderful historic presence in this Rolls Wraith, and Rodeo Drive or Fifth Avenue or
There you
Newport,
go.
Rhode Island.
There you go.
At your fingertips in a Corniche.
See you there.